Good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to the CDSB webinar on water-related disclosures, TCFD-aligned scenario analysis. My name is Julia Kislitsina. I'm the Communications Manager at CDSB, and I'm delighted to introduce our speakers today. My colleague in Berlin, Francesca Recanati, is the lead author of the upcoming CDSB Framework Application Guidance on water-related disclosures. Francesca joined CDSB this year as environmental specialist. She develops technical content to facilitate and foster reporting on natural capital, bringing her experience as sustainability consultant and academic researcher. She holds a PhD in information technology and master's in environmental engineering, both at Politecnico di Milano, with a research focus on quantitative assessment of the environmental sustainability of agri-food systems. She's a researcher on sustainable agriculture with the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, and author of several scientific publications in peer-reviewed international journals, technical reports on food sustainability, and reviewer for international scientific journals and congresses. Francesca is joined by Ariane Laporte-Bisquit and Rafael Camargo from WWF Germany. Ariane is the Water Risk Filter Project Manager. She's responsible for overseeing the ongoing evolution and implementation of the Water Risk Filter strategy. She leads on the engagement with investor and corporate users of the tool in collaboration with the wider WWF network. Last but not least, Rafael is the technical lead of the Water Risk Filter and makes the bridge between science and the project. Rafael is responsible for the maintenance, ongoing technological developments, and guarantees that the tool applies the best available data and technologies for water risk assessment and scenario analysis. Before I hand over to Francesca, just some information about the webinar. This webinar is live streamed on CDSB's YouTube channel and LinkedIn channel. To ask your question or to comment, simply type in the chat under the video on any of the platforms. Alternatively, you can send us questions via email, info@cdsb.net. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to ask questions or share your comments whenever you have them. Now I'm happy to hand over to Francesca.
Right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So thanks, Julia, for the introduction. So before diving deeper into water guidance, water-related risks, and scenario analysis, let me start off with a brief introduction on CDSB for those who are not familiar with what CDSB is and what we do. So CDSB is a consortium of environmental and business NGOs. It was set up in 2007 at the World Economic Forum in Davos, with the mission to support the provision of decision-useful environmental information to the capital market via mainstream reports. So with mainstream report, we mean the annual reporting packages that in which organizations are required to deliver their audited financial results under, for example, the corporate compliance or security laws in the countries in which they operate. So common names used for mainstream reports are, for example, annual reports or registration documents or 10K in the US, for example. So the strategic direction to accomplish the CDSB mission is led by the CDSB board. The board is composed of 9 organizations, and the logos are on the slide. And the board is chaired by the World Economic Forum, and CDSB Secretariat is hosted by CDP. But how we achieve our mission more practically is by offering the CDSB framework, so a framework for reporting environmental and climate information in the mainstream report. And the framework includes 7 guiding principles, so the how to report, and 12 reporting requirements, so the what to report, that cover, for example, from governance to risks and opportunities to future outlook. The framework is fully aligned with the TCFD recommendations and principles, and the TCFD was developed based on the CDSB framework and other leading reporting frameworks. Therefore, the CDSB framework is complementary to existing reporting provisions like CDP, GRI, SASB, and existing regulation. And it is also referenced in the EU non-financial reporting directive guidance and in stock exchange guidance globally. So in addition to the framework, we provide a series of supplementary guides for the users of the CDSB framework and reporters disclosing in line with other measure global frameworks and standards. So these guides seek to improve the quality of disclosures of material information in mainstream report, and they focus on the first 6 requirements of the CDSB frameworks that we will see better later, and are designed to provide companies with hands-on and how to and what to assistance, so more practical suggestions. So the publication of these guidance or guides is ongoing. So the first guidance was of this suit was developed last July, and it focuses on climate, and it is available on the CDSP website, while the second one will be in spring 2021, and it will be on water. So we will launch the application guidance on water-related disclosure, or water guidance, as we will call it for the rest of the webinar. And that is the main focus of the webinar of today, is together like with the WWF water risk filter tool. So that said, let's have an overview of the water guidance. So the aim of the guidance is to support companies in reporting material water-related information in their mainstream report, so together with financial information, and in providing the seizure-useful water-related information for investors. The guidance adds a layer of practical details to the CDSB framework and integrates water-specific elements from existing reporting standards and frameworks on water. It is fully aligned with the TCFD recommendation and other global standards. So to develop the water guidance, we are working with a fantastic working group of about 70 water experts, including companies, investors, NGOs, academics, and consultants. As you can see from this slide, WWF with the 2 great speakers that are with me today, Ariane and Rafael, is part of this working group, and they are greatly contributing to the development of the water guidance. If you're interested on the whole list of the members of the water working group, there is a dedicated web page and on the CDSB website. Well, that said, let me give a couple of additional details on the content of the guidance. As already mentioned before, as the other guides, the water guidance focuses on the first 6 requirements of the CDSB framework. So as you can see from the table in the slides, it provides support in disclosing about water governance, management of water policies, strategies, and targets, water-related risks and opportunities, sources of impacts on water resources and ecosystems, and water-related performance and future outlook. So for each of these requirements, the guidance provides detailed reporting suggestions and guidance to complement the CDSB reporting requirements, a disclosure checklist, references to useful external resources, and examples of good practices from companies' mainstream report. Luckily, we already have some good practices. So water-specific reporting elements, aspects, and challenges included in the CDSB water application guidance have been drawn on existing water reporting standards and framework. For example, from CDP questionnaires, SASB sector-specific standards, GRI 303 on water and effluent, and just to name a few. So we haven't invented anything new, we haven't reinvented the wheel. So we took all the crucial reporting elements and aspects from these precious resources. And these standards and framework then, like the review of these frameworks and standards allowed to identify key characteristic of water issues, management and relation between of water and business, such as, for example, the need of contextualize in space and time the disclosed water-related information, just like, for example, where water is consumed or where water is polluted, or A second important aspect is the importance of engaging with stakeholders in a water basin when managing water resources. The existing water standards and framework also allowed to explore water-related metrics and targets, and the challenges related to these metrics and targets. And also these standards and frameworks allowed to better understand the interconnection between water and other environmental but also socioeconomic aspects and issues, such as, for example, climate change. And this is a crucial aspect that will be explored later in this webinar through the lens of the water risk filter scenarios. Last but not least, the alignment with the TCFD recommendations allowed to provide crucial information on governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets that constitute decision useful information for the main audience of the mainstream report, so investors. Well, so given this overview of the water guidance and its content, so let's see how future outlook and scenario analysis are incorporated in the water guidance. So first of all, outlook is the core of CDSB reporting requirement number 6. So what is an outlook? In simple words, it's a forward-looking summary. In practice, it's a bit more difficult. So the outlook summarizes conclusions about the effect of environmental impact, risks, and opportunities. So requirement 3 for the for those who are familiar with the CDSB framework, on the organization's future performance and position, such as, for example, its capacity to innovate, execute its strategy, and create value over time. The outlook draws on 2 key elements. The first one is the information disclosed in response to requirement from 1 to 5. So in particular, in explaining how governance mechanisms and management contributes and will contribute to the performance of the company, to the exploitation of the opportunities, but also to the mitigation of impacts and risks. The second element that should be combined with the first one regard the company's knowledge of trends or drivers that might affect its future performance and position, such as changes in environmental regulation, for example, in this case, water regulation. And scenario analysis can be a useful tool to investigate such trends and understand the resilience of the company over different time horizons. There is no special or correct formula or way of conducting scenario analysis. It can be based on quantitative models and tools like the water risk filter tool and the related scenario, the related TCFD-aligned scenarios, or can be based on qualitative assessment and considerations, for example. An outlook is just to conclude on the outlook, an outlook is useful when it enables investors to understand the resilience of the company to a suite of possible future scenarios. As Ariane and Rafael will explain later, the WWF water risk filter tool can support the journey from risk assessment to resilience, since it can help evaluate and inform long-term resilience planning and strategy. So focusing on water-related outlook, exploring water-related trends and drivers that will influence the future of company water dependencies and risks and opportunities is challenging due to the interconnected nature of water. For example, socioeconomic trends like population growth will influence water demand in the basin of operation of a company, for example. Or again, climate change and land use change will affect the water supply, just to name a couple. So to support companies in effectively disclose their water-related outlook, the water application guidance will include a checklist on outlook disclosure that underlines first the importance of assessment of the effect of future water-related impacts and risks on the company performance, and underlines also the importance of the description of the adopted techniques such as scenario analysis and used time horizons. The guidance will also include useful resources that can support companies in preparing forward-looking and effective outlook. One of the crucial resources is the WWF water risk filter tool. That is one of the available tools to support both the assessment of water-related risks under requirement 3, and to perform water-related scenario analysis under requirement 6. This tool allows to better understand how future water-related scenarios look like, and will be included in the final version of the water guidance that will be published in April 2021. So in light of this, before giving the floor to Ariane and Rafael, I just wanted to give a couple of details about the progress of the CDSB water guidance. So the guidance, it's now under review by the member of the water working group. It will be tested by companies and discussed through stakeholder roundtables. And there will be a 90-day public consultation that will run from November 25th to the end of February. So check out our social media channels and newsletter to stay up to date. So watch this space. And of course, if you are more than welcome to contribute via both pilot groups, if you are a company, or stakeholders roundtables, and also public consultation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. As I said, in the final version of the guidance, we will include useful resources and examples of good practices to support companies in preparing their water-related information to be included in their mainstream report. And the water risk filter will be one of those resources. Why is this tool useful? This tool allows to explore the link between climate and water-related risks and sheds light also on the crucial regulatory and reputational risks and related plausible future scenarios. This tool supports the integration of water into TCFD-aligned scenario analysis and will strengthen the disclosure and assessment of companies' resilience of future scenarios. So that said, I will hand over to Ariane Laporte-Bisquit, Project Manager, Water Risk Filter at WWF. Ariane, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Could you just please confirm that you can hear me well? Great. So good day, everyone. Thank you so much for this introduction, and really a big thank you to the CDSB team for this great opportunity to present to you all the latest new water risk filter scenarios that we launched this month. So on the next slide, I'll be presenting, for those of you who are not so familiar with the WWF water risk filter tool, I'll first give you a quick and basic introduction to the tool. Essentially, the water risk filter tool is a free, practical online tool designed to be used by companies and investors to assess, respond, and value their water risks. And I'll give you now a quick overview of some of the key functionalities of the tool. Next. First, since it was launched in 2012, the tool is at its core a practical tool to enable companies and investors to conduct a water risk assessment, to understand their exposure to both basin and operational water risks. Next, the tool expanded in 2019 from being a risk assessment tool to also provide recommended response actions to identified water risks, and therefore guiding users from risk to contextual response actions. And now next, with the launch this month of the new water risk filter scenarios, users can now explore forward-looking scenarios aligned to TCFD to better understand future water risk and build resilience. And whilst we will, of course, be focusing this webinar on the new water risk filter scenarios, I also did want to briefly flag that we have another exciting new and upcoming feature that you should all be watching out for in 2021, which is a new valuation tool being developed in collaboration with Water Foundry, and it's going to be powered by CDP data in order to help estimate financial impacts from water risks. So do keep tuned for some new developments still coming up. But after an overview of the key functionalities of the tool, on the next slide, you'll see here a brief overview of some of the users of the water risk filter tool. So since it's launched in 2012, the tool has been widely used by many large multinationals from a range of different sectors, as illustrated with this example on this slide. And we now have almost 6,000 registered users who have been analyzing water risks from a total of over 360,000 sites that have been analyzed. So we're seeing a really great appetite and increase with regards to, corporates and private sector in general, actors wanting to better understand their water risk in order to take action. On the next slide, we'll just wanted to flag that when we were developing the water risk filter scenarios, we had the chance actually to test out and are planning to work closely with some of our corporate partners, as for example, Carlsberg, but also the German food retailer Edeka and the biopharmaceutical company AstraZeneca as just some examples. So we've really been testing it out already and are very excited now that it's available online. And before going and diving into too much details on the water risk filter scenario, specifically in the next slide, I will first give you a bit of a high-level guidance for how companies and investors can use the water risk filter tool and its scenarios to turn risk into resilience. And the first step really, with regards to using the water risk filter tool, is to understand your current water risk exposure and therefore identify most material water risk hotspots on which to focus your contextual response actions to mitigate risk. And for guidance, for those of you who are a bit new in this field, for guidance and recommendations on how to conduct a robust water risk assessment, I encourage you to read this WWF and WBCSD Right Tool for the Job report, which was published in April 2020. But basically, after establishing a baseline of current risk exposure and responses, the next step is to then use the water risk scenarios to assess exposure to future water risks and understand how different types of water risk are likely to evolve in 2030 and 2050 under different scenarios. And in particular, when using the scenarios, doing your scenario analysis and understanding future water risk, it is important to identify also what are the key drivers of change to be able to set contextually appropriate responses to this, as well as identify the most material sites or assets that are likely to face the greatest increase in risk, as those are likely also to face the greatest challenge for adaptation and therefore will require, to focus resilience efforts. Now, on the next, after conducting scenario analysis, it's important to use the outputs of the scenario analysis to evaluate whether the company's current strategy is adequately resilient or will need stronger resilience planning, considering the future risk levels that you've identified. Because of course, both climate and socioeconomic changes, it's a bit uncertain how it will evolve. So it's important to evaluate response and strategies to a range of possible futures, possible scenarios, including, of course, a pessimistic also pathway scenario in which water risks are likely to increase most significantly. And therefore, hope for the best, but do prepare for the worst. But in all cases, response actions should be contextually appropriate. And if a response action does work well under different scenarios, it is likely well suited to change and therefore could be considered future fit. In the tool, actually, we do have a section in the response section which provides recommendations on response actions to address identified current water risks. And we're seeking to develop and enhance this section of the tool so that users will be able to explore how resilient different response actions are under different scenarios and therefore also identify opportunities for resilience. And that next, last but not least, we encourage you to use the results from the water risk filter scenarios, risk assessment, and also the analysis from scenario analysis to disclose on material water risks, opportunities, as well as the contextual responses and strategies in place. And you should be reporting this in your mainstream reporting in line with the upcoming CDSB water guidance, as well as via platforms such as CDP. And the water risk filter tool really aims to provide that reliable, consistent, comparable information of both current and future water risk, which in turn will help better inform investors' decision-making needs and processes as recommended by TCFD. And in particular, last but not least, I did want to mention with the development of that new valuation tool, which I flagged to you and will be called, the acronym is WAVE, we do hope that it will also help users in the future to explore the potential financial impacts from various water risks under different scenarios. And this may help companies then convert risk into financial impact and in therefore also strengthen disclosure on financial exposure as recommended by TCFD. So do watch out for this new feature too. Now on the next slide, so I've given you an overview of that four-step process, guiding users using the tool from understanding current and future risks to planning for resilience and reporting. And now I'm excited to dive more deeply into what exactly are the water risk filter scenarios, which I'm sure you're all excited to hear about. Now, when developing the scenarios, we actually aimed to apply the same approach as for the tool's current basin risk assessment framework by integrating 2030 and 2050 quantitative projections covering all types of water risk, as you can see here on this slide. So ranging from, focusing on also the physical risks as recommended by TCFD. So for example, acute physical risks such as flooding, but also the more chronic physical risks such as scarcity, quality, ecosystem services. But we also cover with our water risk scenarios regulatory and reputational water risks, which can cause significant potential impacts if overlooked. So via these scenarios, we're really trying to aim to cover all types of water risk in order for you to be able to understand what are the most critical future water risks that you might be exposed to. But now I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Rafael Camargo, who is the water filter technical lead, and will give you a more detailed overview of some of the technical sides with regards to the water filter, but also some practical examples of applications and analysis. So thank you very much, and over to Rafael now.
Thank you, Ariane. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, CDSP, for the opportunity to talk in this webinar. And yeah, we are happy to explain a bit of our work at the water risk filter to you all. And what we see in the next slide is that the water risk filter is intended to be comprehensive and cover all those aspects of water risks, as Ariane just mentioned. And actually, we didn't model any of those aspects of water risk here in-house. We collaborate with several research groups with their expertise in these different topics of very specific topics. And actually, what we did as the major work we did is a compilation of all those different models and different aspects of water risk together. And we made it easy accessible so that companies and financial institutions or any organization now can use and easily compare these different aspects of water risks, and then be ready to do and further understand what are the major risks in their portfolio. And so now users can have a look and see maps and how risks are on scarcity or flooding, but they also have the opportunity to be and look at aggregated risks, for example, physical risks or regulatory risks, combining these different risk categories together. And what we see in the next slide is an example that is aggregation of all those 12 risk categories together, and this is what we call the overall water risk. And here we can easily see how water risks will evolve over time, and ranging from this optimistic scenario, which in general is less risk across the whole globe, to this on the top very pessimistic scenario, which we see in general very, very high risk. And just as reference here, we see in the middle the current trend scenario. It's more approximately as the community is listening to the 2-degree scenarios, and this is what we have as the current trend, just as reference. But as you see the narratives here in those texts just below the name of the scenarios, is what are the very simplification of the narratives for each of these pathways. And what we see is that risks will evolve over time very different in these three pathways, but also geographically very differently. But I think we can have a bit more of practical examples in the next slide, so perhaps will be a bit easier to understand. But just another clarification before that is here is just how the water risk filter scenarios were produced is following this simple logic model where we have the current risks in those 12 risk categories, and now we are adding this layer of projected change, and then is what we understand as future risks. And in this case, we needed actually to create a new class of risk. Before, the water risk filter was always ranging from very low to very high risk, and now we had to create actually a new class of risk, which now called extreme. And this is basically because we saw that regions of today already with high risk, it's very often the ones that will experience and will face the greatest increase in risk over time. And that's why we need to add this new class. But without much more details on this, but of course, feel free to make your questions in the comments. I would like to show you a bit of the application of the water risk filter scenarios. And we can, I'm sorry, just would like to add that here in the next slide is just a sample of how the water risk filter scenarios look like, and they are online. Anyone can access the page. And so you already can explore how those future worlds will look like more likely. But just again, this is pretty much for visualization, and the application of this data is what we'll see in the next slide. Is, for example, any organization can use their portfolio, and this organization could be a company, as for example a manufacturer or a textile company, or could be a financial institution, asset management with their portfolio and all their clients in different sectors, and also including supply chain if necessary or feasible. And what we see is the range of risk ranging from this light green to darker red as the high risks in darker red. And we can also input and easily identify where are the hotspots when we add this dimension of materiality. And here, for example, the bigger dots are the sites or the asset level data with higher materiality. And then it starts giving us where to concentrate efforts to build resilience and adaptation. But of course, we can be a bit more detailed on this, and we can look at one single site. And then what we see in the next slide, please, is for each single site, we can have a look how this single site is likely to evolve over time. Here is an example of overall water risk, but we can be more specific and look only at water scarcity or flooding or any of other aspects that we have. But we can even be more specific. We can try to have a look and all the risk categories together. And what we see in the next slide is that we can have a good understanding of one single site or even the whole portfolio and see what are the drivers of change that are the most relevant and this will vary from site to site and depending on their location across the globe, but they also will vary from scenario pathway to pathway. And here you see in the lighter shades of yellow, it's the risk of today, but then you see these darker shades is the increasing risk by 2030 and 2050. And we see, for example, here is scarcity in the center, it's pretty much low, but there is projected to increase a little bit. But then when we look at the optimistic scenario, we see in the next slide, we can see that this can be actually mitigated. But if we don't act in the way to mitigate risk, this in the pessimistic scenario can actually increase even further than the current pathway. And not only in scarcity, but you can see this could happen in other aspects. For example, the 4 bars on the bottom that represent regulatory risks is the one that are projected to increase the most in this fictional example here. And then of course, it's very important to understand, and please read the documentation, so to understand the assumptions and all the uncertainties that scenario analysis bring. But the idea is exactly to look at those 3 different scenarios so that we always have this range of possible futures as a way to manage uncertainties. Another example that we have is the application of the next slide, please, is the application of the scenarios data on agricultural commodities and supply chain. Here, for example, we took data from MapSpan, where it's basically a crop distribution, and could be in here we have an example of avocado production in South America, but could be any crop across the globe. And then we have a look at this region. There is where are the hot spots of production, but then we look what are the risk evolution over time. And what we see in the next piece is that one region, for example, on the top, we have the Peruvian coast, is slightly lower risk than the central Chile today, but is actually projected to change more than the central Chile. And so there is this 2 ways to look at risk. What is the absolute risk of today and in the future, and also how much it will change over time. And just to be clear that both are very important to look at, but when we see a greater change, it means actually more challenge for adaptation, and where it's very important to invest efforts to mitigate risks and also to adapt for the new future. But of course, then we can be even more specific, and we look at the next piece of this slide is that we can see what are the drivers of risk change. And so although they are all in the South America and we are talking about the same commodity, we see that one region is likely to see flooding increasing quite significantly, but the other region is actually more likely to decrease the risk of flooding. And this is because different changes in climate and as well as socioeconomics. And I think these are already enough of examples of applications of the water risk filter. And I now would like to hand over back to Ariane, and she will conclude with a bit of what we do at the water risk filter.
Thank you so much. Yes, on the next slide, please, I'll just, oh, I think there was one more slide. Sorry, Rafael, please go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, here is another example of application, and I'll be very quick here. It's just another way to use the scenarios, and we use the hydropower dams data, and just to have a look how water scarcity will change over time, and in relation to reservoir capacity. And reservoir capacity can be very well linked to production, energy production. And so we see some hotspots where we see big bubbles, or at least a cluster of bubbles in orange to red, indicating that those hydropowers today, they will face much higher risks, much higher levels of water scarcity in the future. And these could be not so relevant just in one hydropower, but if you accumulate to all those ones in a single region, this could be quite big impact to a country or to a whole region. And in overall, 37% of existing hydropowers today are projected to face increase in scarce risk by 2050. And yeah, now back to Ariane.
Excellent, thank you. So yes, thank you so much. I hope this short but comprehensive presentation has helped you better understand what the water filter scenarios are all about. They're really aligned to TCFD to help companies and investors better understand future water risk and guiding them towards building resilience. It's a very exciting new feature in the tool. Now, there is a brief that we released for more guidance as well as overview technical aspects with regards to the water filter scenario. So I do encourage you to have a look at the brief also that we released, as well as some of the tutorials and videos that are available in the water filter tool to get you started with regards to using the tool and conducting a risk assessment and future scenario analysis. But if you do want to, get more tailored support, do get in touch with us. We have an expert group here that can support with regards to tailored risk assessment and scenario analysis. So don't hesitate to contact us. And last but not least, do watch out for some new resources and reports that will be coming out in the future, including one where we'll be unpacking more on how water stewardship can help business build climate resilience, as well as another one in December with regards to applications of the water scenarios on agricultural commodities. So loads of exciting additional resources becoming available, but strongly encourage you to get started. And go ahead and use the tool. It's a user-friendly, really designed for the private sector to start engaging and better understanding current as well as future water risks and drive action. So thank you so much. And opening the floor to the Q&A now.
Thank you very much for amazing presentations. We have had quite a few questions come in the chat. I hope you can all see the chat with the questions. So if you see something you want to address, feel free to address it. Otherwise, I will quickly summarize the first question. So would the application guidance on water include examples of scenario analysis? This is a question to Francesca.
Well, thanks for the question. So the guidance will include some good practices from companies' mainstream report. So, like to show how a future outlook and a scenario analysis can be summarized properly in a mainstream report. So these are the kind of examples that we will provide. And we will also refer to external resources, like, for example, those ones that like Ariane just mentioned that are more on application. So these are the kind of resources that we will provide. Yeah, I hope it clarifies.
Many thanks, Francesca. I see there's another question about the guidance and the potential linkage between water-related disclosures and biodiversity and also land use. Perhaps you can comment on that.
Yeah, I'll try to comment on this one and also on social aspects. So the guidance includes some linkages to biodiversity and land use, especially when describing the under requirement 3 and 4, so on risks and impacts. So of course the guidance are not really prescribing any metrics, but it is including examples on potential risks that are due to the link between loss of biodiversity, for example, and water, but also some impacts. So on land use change and loss of biodiversity that and link with impacts related to water resources. And I just wanted to link to another questions that was pointing to social impact, the same thing. So the guidance is due to the nature of the also to the CDSB framework is mainly focused on the environmental aspects. But in the risks, when we mention and include some example on reputational risks, for example, this is the way as we kind of include some social aspects, of course, but this doesn't mean that these aspects have to be excluded from the mainstream report. It's just that at this stage, the guidance provide only few or useful but not extensively like support and suggestions on social aspects. But in the future, we will try to to do also this part.
I think there were also a couple of questions on the guidance in terms of who is it meant for? Can it be used in every region by all companies, or there are specific sort of company sizes? Could you comment on that?
No, well, the guidance is applicable like globally, and it's even like by each sector. The main audience is, of course, like investors, but like since usually annual reports are on like freely available, so online, like anybody can access them, and like there is no particular size. So like some companies like have to produce annual reports, so they might want to include water if water is material, but it's like in principle any company can use it.
Thank you very much. There is a question for Ariane. For large companies with many operations and large value chains conducting for the first time a water risk assessment and scenario analysis across the full range of companies' value chain seems like a daunting exercise. Where to focus on to get started?
Thank you. Yeah, excellent question. So I think before, just as a bit of background to be aware of, is that the water filter tool can assess water risk across a large portfolio of sites and different operations across a company's value chain. And it acts essentially as a screening tool to help identify and prioritize on water risk hotspots. So that's essentially what the tool does, and it can be applied for companies in many different sectors. But given that we understand that it is often challenging for large companies to assess their full value chain in one exercise, we do recommend that as a first step, do focus on portions of the value chain with the greatest strategic importance to the business. So in terms of, greatest materiality, high value, high production volume, but also portions of the value chain with high dependencies and or impact on water. So that's where, if you want to get started, that's where we encourage you to get started. And then as you start having more access to information and data and understanding your full value chain, then you can start looking at other also aspects, maybe non-water intensive elements in the value chain, but when thinking of resilience, maybe critical to address with regards to exposure to extreme events like floods. So for instance, a distribution or logistics center, for example, can become stranded due to a flood event, so which could have significant disruptions in the supply chain and sales of your product. So just saying, you can gradually build in order to have a full understanding of exposure, but there are ways to get started, and those would be the elements that I would encourage you. So think about strategic business importance, the materiality, the value aspect, as well as which portions of the value chain have high dependencies and or impact on water.
Thank you very much. I see there's another question, perhaps for all of you, since you're all on the technical working group for the water guidance. And the question is about the difference of the guidance to other available resources. Perhaps there's a way you can expand on that.
I can start, and then if Ariane and Rafael want to add to, like as we showed the presentation before, like there are already guidelines for specific sectors, standards, and so on. So the difference here is really like the location of the information, so the mainstream report, and like it's not only the location, but is also which information you select to be included in this report. That is usually about financial like information. So the information that you will include, like water-related information that you will include, like in the mainstream report, should be linked somehow to the financial element, and this means that like water is a financially material element for your business. And this guidance basically include all the important key characteristics and aspects related to water, and it tries to help companies in supporting this information and make them more adapted and linked to the financial to the financial information. So that's the main thing. I hope it's clear. Otherwise, I try to answer in the chat or in YouTube directly in a written form. I hope it was clear. Oh, we lost Ariane.
Oh, unfortunately, we have lost. I think I'm hoping she will be able to reconnect. Rafael, would you like to add anything to the water guidance? What is the difference? Why is the water guidance there? What is the value of the water guidance that you're currently also working on together with Francesca?
Yes, sure. I think the value of it is also to be a compilation, because as Francesca showed, there is a variety of very precious resources out there, but sometimes this is quite overwhelming for companies to start reading all those length reports and guidance. And the idea of this CDSB guidance is to compile the most relevant, essential information and to be a bit more clear to the people that are not so water, not say that they're not a water expert, just saying that they're not working with water issues every day. And then I think this is one big difference.
Thank you very much. Francesca, perhaps you could add something also to the timeline that you presented earlier, where you have mentioned roundtables as well as the consultation. Could you please add some more information to that?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, these, as I said, first we have the amazing water working group that is supporting this process. But of course, we are really open to receive any fruitful and constructive comments to the guidance. And so we try to get feedback directly from companies that are the real user of the guidance. So through pilot groups. And you can of course join. Ariane is back, but also through a public consultation. So, for example, as linking back to the question before on biodiversity or even on social aspects, if you would like to provide additional external resources or additional comment, or you are aware of a specific, a very good example on risk that links biodiversity and water, and they are not included in the guidance, you can respond to the open consultation. And the other mechanism or event that we are planning for January and February are stakeholders roundtables. So not webinar, but more interactive section. Of course, we will organize them virtually, but yeah, we will try to make some smaller group discussion group on specific water challenges that relates to water guidance. And if you are interested, just reach out to us, and we are really happy to have you on board.
Thank you very much. We have a final question for Ariane. What information needs to be provided to analyze water risk using the water risk tool? How can investors use this tool given limited asset data availability?
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I disappeared for a few seconds, but I'm back. So very good question. So in terms of information required to use the water filter tool to do a risk assessment as well as scenario analysis, the basic, most minimum information that does need to be provided is location information of sites or assets in order to analyze current and future basin water risks. And additionally, if you do have operational data, so how does that site use and depend on water, then you can also conduct a more comprehensive risk assessment looking at both basin and operational risks. Now, at a minimum, though, it is really important to have some information on location. However, in any case, I do want to, reassure you that if you don't have any specific location data, users can still explore the tool's different water risk maps of current as well as future risks. And there is some country profile information, so country level risk information available. And I'd say those are really good starts to sort of start to understand geographically how, and what types of water risks are the issues in different places. So that's a good starting point. But obviously, as you know, water is local, and it does really require having location information if you really want to accurately understand what types of water risk you are facing in a particular location. And therefore, for investors, we'd say it is really important to ask companies to disclose, to share this sort of information. It's fundamental to have location information to really accurately evaluate current and future water risks. Now, you could do this by actually asking the companies to be more transparent, also, or by reporting to you on, what the results of an analysis that they did with a tool like the water risk filter. But obviously, we are seeing, which is great, lots of momentum with TCFD and all these different initiatives, that there is more momentum on transparency and disclosure with regards to asset level data. And on really a positive side, I would say, is that we're also seeing a bit of an explosion of asset level data in general becoming available. In particular, there are some data sets now available on for particular sectors such as mining, energy, apparel, and textile also. So there's a huge amount of transparency. We do have as an example, where we did use a global data set for the mining sector. We actually did an analysis using the water filter tool across a portfolio of mining sites using the S&P Global Mining Database. And this report is available online if you want to look as an example. But basically what I'm really getting at is that with all this asset level data becoming available, there's really lots of interesting and new opportunities to explore for deeper analysis and understanding. But in any case, even if you do not have yet location data, you can still get started with the tool by exploring the maps as well as the country profile information to start getting a sense of, the water risk exposure and water risk profile.
Thank you very much. I think this is about all the time we have for this evening webinar. So I'd like to thank all the speakers for their amazing presentations and so much interesting information that was provided today. I'd like to thank the audience, of course, for their questions and their interest. In addition, we'd like to thank the live program of the European Union and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for supporting the work on the water guidance. Last call to action, besides checking out the water tool and the water guidance, please also subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media. We have a lot of very interesting events coming up, as well as very interesting projects such as the Enhanced Reporting Europe campaign, which allows companies in Europe to have free support, free consultancy support from CDSB on environmental disclosures. So do reach out to our corporate engagement manager to find out more about this sort of service. Thank you very much. We're wishing you a good evening or a good day, depending on where you are. Thank you. Bye-bye.